points are all the stability. It's part of the oligarchy that holds everything together. The critical points are pretty much everything, because if the critical points are holding together, you're not going, the tail can move the head very quickly, and I would ask you to think about that, because most people look at an organization, they see some big figurehead, and they say he has a lot of power, and they can shake things up, they can hire people, they can plot strategy, they have a lot of what I call vertical power. Vertical power is what males do. Yeah, most men love vertical power. It's kick a rabbit, it's breathe some fire, yell at a rabbit. It's exert that male's type of power, deal steel at a rabbit. That's all vertical power. Lady rabbits, Aryan girl rabbits, they're not interested in vertical power. They're not interested in male type power. They do what I call run rabbits. For instance, the other evening, I had to get off the couch late at night and go to a grocery store and get something. Yeah, a lady rabbit made me do that. But she didn't make me do that. I went and did it and got home, and then actually in the parking lot I had to go back in and get something else and come back out and then go back home. And then when I got home, or basically I was out in the parking lot and I got a phone call saying, you got to go back in and get this, and I got home, and by the time I did all this, most people couldn't make me do that no matter what at 10 a.m. at night or 10 p.m. at night, but she did, and she ran a rabbit. Running a rabbit is the art of basically what women do to get what they want without causing a fight, causing commotion. It's an art form, and white women do it better than any other women, in my opinion, simply because race is real and it matters. But maybe you've seen that 12-year-old girl, the little 12-year-old girl who can babysit 7 kids. They can run rabbits. I don't know how they do it. Men want to kick them through the screen door. I know I do. I can't run a rabbit. Men cannot run rabbits. Women run rabbits. But anyways, I'm going to come back to this running rabbits. It's how what I call it, men play hardball and women, by and large, 80% of them play ladyball. It's not an absolute thing, but there are Martha Stewarts that can play hardball, but most women have no interest in playing hardball. At the same time, they play ladyball very well. They are pure velvet. They'll create problems to get a reaction, to get a solution, and they don't even know what I just told them. Yeah, they do it every day. But those are all great. Those are all things that is what I call latent power. June Cleaver. The June Cleavers, no one ever thought, the feminists always were sold the bill that they didn't have any power. Well, sure they did. They had ungodly power. But it was latent power. It was running rabbit power. It's non-vertical. It's horizontal, or not what I call non-vertical. They run rabbits, and they will run a rabbit this way. They will run a rabbit that way. They will run you up the wall and upside down. But it's power. It takes a lot of power to get a male up and moving without having to threat violence. It is. It takes a lot of power to keep a bunch of kids busy or a bunch of adults busy in a department. There's different strategies and different tactics, and I'm going to come back to this, my ideals on it and how it develops. But what I say is, women like non-vertical things. They want to run rabbits. June Cleaver does not exercise power vertically. She doesn't have to. But at the same time, she has ungodly power. So anyways, looking at Russia, they stacked all these women. These oligarchs surrounded themselves with women at all these points. And there was various different reasons for that. Some of them were already smart and already there. But they got themselves into trouble. They got themselves into trouble very quickly. And of course, obviously, if someone was a KGB hand and they're dangerous and they're not a traitor, you can isolate them, you can throw them out to some extent. But they got their stuff together. And the next thing you know, In my opinion, they ran a textbook, what I call the textbook Cayenne Pokemon. If you have an oligarchy, the oligarchs were not a true oligarchy. They didn't have some big power grid. There was a handful of guys at the top, surrounded by a bunch of traders, segmented over a bunch of different industries, all with a bunch of consolidated partners, with a bunch of women. They moved a bunch of women to the control point, and they had a bunch of Slavs who were sitting there ticked off. They were trying to get rid of them, so on and so forth. And you had some violence that broke out and everything else. But I mean, none of Putin's gang ever got caught shooting anybody or anything. But one thing they did that was dangerous is they moved women, Slavic women, Aryan girl rabbits, into too many powerful points, in my opinion, or at or near a critical point. And they started throwing in jackrabbits. In other words, they were winking and nodding, in my opinion, and throwing them in there. And of course, you already had a few at the top who were loyal to the oligarchs, who thought they were loyal. The oligarchs thought they were loyal to, and Vladimir Putin would be one. And so what they did was they did the classic Cayenne Pokemon. You see, in this case, you're dealing with the oligarchs are by and large Hebrews. And anytime you have a top-light structure like that with a handful of people surrounded by traitors, not knowing who's their friend, having to keep control of all this, well, you're going to have a lot of fear. And of course, Hebrews tend to sit at the synagogue every week thinking people are out to get them, and then they wind up surprised when people are out to get them. They're natural. They fear. They're either on one end, you got these egotistical maniacs who are very arrogant, like the neocons. Another minute, they're totally fearless. They're like schizophrenic. I mean, totally full of fear. They go from arrogant to full of fear and back to arrogant. I don't know how to figure it out, but they're very prone to fear. And so they popped they popped what I call a Cayenne Pokemon. And that's what I call it. Many of you guys, if you haven't read anything about revolutions, there's a simple kind of revolution called a FOCO. A FOCO revolution is what you saw in Cuba that brought in power Fidel Castro. He drives to power, he plants his flag. It's simple. It's what you see is what you get. A Cayenne Pokemon, it looks like a FOCO, but is what you don't see can kill you politically. What they did was they produced a couple false fronts, and you're getting my interpretation, by the way. I'm not going into all the ins and outs, but I'm giving you a broad overview at first, and I'm going to go back into some interesting things. But they produced a false front. In other words, the oligarchs thought they were being challenged by a handful of groups down near these critical points. Now, was it these women? Was it these women, in my opinion? No, but they helped stage it. Staging is critical. It's where you're identifying your critical points and throwing your jacks. In other words, they stoked a lot of fear. They created a problem, and of course, the oligarchs could not see all their enemies. That's a big structure. They had all these government body structures left over. They couldn't see all their enemies. They could see a couple of them. All they knew is that someone was going to start coming after them, coming after their power. So they created a problem. That problem, of course, elicited a normal reaction among these type of oligarchs, a fear. And they said, we got to have. I'm assuming they were sold. They said, we got to have someone to deal with this, to ferret this out, to see who's who, so we can consolidate our power. We can keep consolidating our power and go forward with our plans. And of course, that came up with a solution. That solution at the time was Putiput, Vladimir Putin. Now, whether he presented himself, whether he was there in local, whether he was sold from an associate, which is what I think, I don't know. It really doesn't matter. I'm just putting this ideal out there. But the next thing you know, he's in power. Now, when he came to power, no one announced a revolution. Yeah, you didn't hear any revolution. But what was funny is the back talk. When he came to power, they had enough critical points, and of course they had all these seething big white KGB, ex-KGB jackrabbits that were ticked off at the oligarchs, ticked off at everything, waiting in the wings, ready to come back to work, so on and so forth. And so they had everything to go, but it wasn't a normal type of situation. They were ticked off. You did have a common sense of oppression among the Russians. Again, we had a common sense of oppression, you could say, among non-victims. I mean, they had power, and they exercised it. Now, they didn't shoot anybody, or they didn't caught shooting anybody. But anyways, he rolled to power overnight. No one really knew it, but they did. When he came into power, it was overnight. It was like the Sith Lord issuing those 888 codes across the stormtroopers, and they do a 180, and they start doing something totally different than what they're supposed to do. You're supposed to be helping out the Jedis. Well, we're not working for the Jedis anymore. We're working for the Sith Lord. He gave us that 888 code. And the next thing you know, the traitors are isolated and gone, and the oligarchs